All right, welcome to Story Driven Messaging. If you've never taken this course with us before, or if you have taken it before, it's important to note that this is a revised version of our original course under the same name. As we've worked through the content and worked with ministries applying the principles that you'll learn in this course, we've made a couple of important adjustments, and we felt that they were large enough changes that we needed to re-record this course and our purpose-driven strategy course. My name is Zach Layton. In 2011, I founded a nonprofit creative agency called Reliant Creative. We started the agency with the belief that God is working in powerful ways globally, and that if we could tell those stories, we could inspire action and mobilize the church. Our purpose at Reliant is to help the church testify of all that Jesus is doing. Now, it's important to note a couple things before we get started. First, this course is meant to work in tandem with our purpose-driven strategy course. In order to ensure that the core messaging you create throughout this course is rooted in purpose and is informed by your ministry's guiding principles, it's important that you first complete the purpose-driven strategy coursework. We said at the end of our purpose-driven strategy course that your guiding principles sit at the center of your core messaging. Without your guiding principles, it will be difficult to ensure your communication is rooted in your why or your core beliefs. Second, I think it's important that we define story if we're going to create story-driven messaging. Messaging that follows story structure. Robert McKee is known in Hollywood among writers, directors, and actors alike to be the most prominent storytelling guru in our generation. He defines story in its most simple terms. Conflict changes life. Without conflict, a story is not a story. As we work through this course, you'll begin to see why the definition is so important. It informs the entire formula and structure that we use when crafting core messaging that is rooted in story structure. Third, for those of you who might be new to marketing terms, messaging is simply the words that you use to communicate with your audience. Messaging can present itself in the form of your traditional corporate manifesto, also called your vision, mission, and core values. Messaging can also show up on your website, email campaigns, newsletters, and any of your marketing content. Really, we define messaging as the use of the written word to communicate with your audience. Fourth, core messaging, traditionally called your corporate manifesto or your vision, mission, and core values, again, is what we'll be talking about today. We generally find that traditional corporate manifestos are long-winded, confusing, and filled with business lingo and ministry strategy language that's difficult to understand. We approach core messaging with two things in mind, two things that seem to go ignored in most ministry cases that we run into. Core messaging must be clear and simple. If it's not clear and simple, it'll be hard to build brand advocates. Core messaging also should be rooted in story structures. This is what is most often ignored. We talked about the sterility of core messaging in our purpose-driven strategy course. Story structures can help you ensure your messaging is a little less sterile. Story structures will also ensure that your messaging is relatable to your audience. Now, we've just stated that one of the primary goals in all marketing communication is clear communication. If your message isn't clear, you'll never be able to create brand advocates. A 7th or 8th grader should be able to understand what you do, how you do it, and why you do what you do. And in today's world, they need to be able to grasp those things quickly. This course is designed to help you start developing messaging that is clear, simple, efficient, and effective. Remember from our other courses, if we want to tell great stories, sharing how God is working through your ministry, then we can inspire action and mobilize the church around your cause. We can create brand advocates for your ministries. The strategy and messaging content we teach and use when we work with ministry clients is unique, but it's heavily influenced by these thinkers and resources. As always, I want to share where these ideas we are presenting in this course originate. The reason I want to share where these ideas come from is one, I want to communicate that although the messaging content we teach is unique, it's heavily influenced by these thinkers. These ideas are not my own original content, And the people you see here have laid the heavy groundwork for what we'll explore today. And 2, I want you to be able to continue your exploration of the ideas that we'll bring up in this course long after we finish here today, so that you can see for yourself that what we're teaching is supported and taught by brilliant thinkers and people. C.S. Lewis, Joseph Campbell, Dan Harmon, Jonah Sachs, Christopher Vogler, Simon Sinek, Carl Jung, and Donald Miller. All brilliant guys who have created the ideas we're going to explore today. We'll touch on most of these guys in today's course, but we'll especially be focusing on Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, Dan Harmon's Story Circle, and Donald Miller's Story Messaging Framework. We've put a bit of spin on all of these ideas, or all of the ideas that these guys have shared to make the content relevant to ministries specifically. But the core ideas come from these thinkers. You may even be familiar with Donald Miller. His story brand framework has had a profound impact on the ministry space. All of the things he teaches are rooted in the hero's journey, but I believe that he doesn't take the framework far enough. The hero's journey, also called the monomyth, has profound implications for our storytelling, our marketing, and our messaging. C.S. Lewis argued that Jesus was the fulfillment of the monomyth, and therefore the applications of this structure for our ministries are significant and profound. So why does this all matter? Why should we care if our organizations have core messaging that follow story structures? Why should we care whether or not our marketing efforts are driven by our purpose, or whether or not our stories follow a story structure like the hero's journey? It matters because these techniques are incredibly effective at shaping mindset. They're incredibly effective at building a brand, developing advocates, for engaging with audiences emotionally, and getting partners and participants invested in our causes. The most successful companies in the world follow these techniques and practices, and they find success because these ideas work well to emotionally engage audiences. When we're talking about starting with why, the goal is a clear message. Every single brand you see up here has an incredibly clear message, and their customers can easily understand what these companies offer, how they are set apart, and most importantly, why they do what they do. Their audiences can sing the praises of these companies and advocate for these brands because their messages are easy to understand and easy to share. If we want our organizations to grow in impact, to grow in reach, to increase in effectiveness, if we want to increase partner and participant support and investment, if we want to actually build a brand in the ministry space, we have to be clear in our communication. And we need to develop ministry brands that partners and participants can get behind and relate to. Now, one more housekeeping item before we get started. I want to establish a couple of definitions that we'll use throughout this course. You'll recognize these definitions from our purpose-driven strategy course. In the past, we've used the term donor to describe those we're calling to financially give to our ministries. And we've used the term beneficiary to describe the people our ministries exist to serve. We've recently made a couple of changes to the terms we use. We now refer to donors as partners and beneficiaries as participants. It'll become more apparent later in this course why we've made this change, but to sum up the change quickly, we've come to realize that we're calling both parties to join our ministries on a journey. Both parties are necessary. Both parties play a role in the story. And especially when we're talking about beneficiaries, the term beneficiary describes a passive and helpless individual. And that's just not the case in almost all cases. Additionally, the definition of donor also has a strictly financial connotation to the term. And we want to encourage you to call people to far greater investment in your ministry than simply financially investing. Partner and participant describe the people we're calling to action much better than donor and beneficiary. Furthermore, the synonyms for donor are angel, fairy godmother, and sugar daddy. The ministry world has been a little careless with this term donor, and we've been as guilty as anyone. We're committing to see that change on our end. And with those definitions in place, we can finally get started today. You'll recognize this diagram from the end of our purpose-driven strategy course. Remember, your guiding principles sit at the center of your core messaging. In our purpose-driven strategy course, you did the groundwork and established your guiding principles. We'll now use those principles to inform your ministry's core messaging. These guiding principles will sit at the center of your core messaging and inform your purpose statement, your mission statement, and your vital traits. We'll talk about all of these elements in this course. As I said in the last course, it's important to note your core messaging is what will be seen publicly. Your guiding principles should be for internal purposes only. They simply lay the groundwork for your public-facing communication. Nobody needs to know that your ministry's archetypal character is the caregiver, for example. These guiding principle elements simply provide your teams with guidance as you craft your core messaging. Now, if you've taken our purpose-driven strategy course, you'll recognize this slide. We established that in that course that your ministry is not the hero. Your partners and participants are the heroes. Today, as we start talking about messaging and communication structures, and as we start walking through the hero's journey, I want to spend some time sharing why your partners and participants are both heroes in your stories and your communication. I want to show you how they play that role together at the same time. And this is the reason why we've made the change from using the definitions of donor and beneficiary to partner and participant. We live in a digital world now. For years, we've been tailoring and focusing our communication structures on our financial investors and what we've historically called our donors. Donald Miller's work laid the groundwork for a shift in communication, placing your ministries as the hero in the story, to communicating that your donors are the heroes in the story. It was a good start and a good change, but I don't think Donald Miller took it far enough. You see, not only does your participant play an incredibly important role in the story, but in the digital world that we live in, they see all of your communication. We've been communicating about our participants as if they weren't in the room, as if they aren't listening or watching. We've been communicating about them like they're helpless, inactive characters in our stories. Now, in most cases, I don't think that this was intentionally meant to be harmful, but ignorance isn't an excuse, and we have to be better. Your participants, the people your ministry exists to serve, have just as much value and worth as your partners. They have just as much worth and value as you. They are created in the image of God in the same way you and I are, and they have an incredibly important role to play in our stories. Your ministry doesn't exist without them. Your partners aren't needed if they don't exist. We all just serve different roles at different times. Furthermore, depending on your ministry context and the work that you do, you're not just calling your ministry participants to rescue and redemption. They're not just being called to freedom from slavery and addiction. We should all be calling our participants into something much greater. When we create core messaging for our audiences, our core messaging must take into account and consider both our partners and our participants. They are both the main character in our stories. They are both heroes in our stories. We'll explore this idea further later in this course, but our messaging needs to be general enough, complete enough, and holistic enough to speak to both parties so as not to alienate either party. All parties, your participants, your partners, and your ministry are necessary for the ministry to exist. All parties are necessary for the story. Everyone has a role. No role is more important than the other. And without any one of these roles, your ministry doesn't exist. This is what we call holistic core messaging. So before we get into the story scripting and messaging frameworks for your ministry brand, I want to give a quick summary and refresher of the hero's journey. Because everything we'll teach in this messaging course is rooted in that story structure. If you haven't already, please feel free to take some time walking through our storytelling structures course, as that course will provide an in-depth look at the hero's journey and the importance of the structure in relation to your brand and messaging. Our Why Story course and our Testimony in the Hero's Journey course would also be beneficial courses to consider. Today, we're just going to quickly summarize the structure. So here's a variation of the hero's journey by Christopher Vogler. His version is a condensed 12-step version of Joseph Campbell's original 17-step model. Now, the version we'll walk through today is an even more summarized version than this, but I think Christopher Vogler's version provides a nice in-depth look, and it hits all the main points we'll make in a bit. This monomyth story structure lays the groundwork for all of your holistic core messaging to come. The mission statement you create later will follow the 3-act departure, initiation, return model. The formula we'll use will be problem, solution, result, and it's rooted in the hero's journey, departure, initiation, and return 3-act structure. Your brand story script, which we'll also create in a later course, will be used on your website and will follow this structure. The monomyth, or the hero's journey, the model you see here, is the framework we're using for all of our communication structures. And here's why we want to follow a structure like this. First, this is the story structure of our lives. We relate to stories that are told with these structures because we live these stories over and over again in our own lives. This story arc is the reoccurring story arc of our lives. And so when we hear similar stories, we relate to them. We're emotionally engaged by them, and we share them with others. We said before that traditional corporate manifestos are sterile and often don't relate to the audiences we're trying to reach. If we can write our core messaging in a story structure we know relates to all people across all cultures, then we can move away from sterile core messaging and move towards emotionally engaging content. Second, we encourage you to follow structure because it gives us a plug and play model for our communication that we know is going to relate every single time. Creating a landing page for your website. This model will ensure the content engages your audience. Writing a keynote speech for your upcoming gala. This model will ensure the content engages. Writing an email blast story for your audience about the participant whose life was transformed by Christ. This model will ensure the content engages. We all know and understand the power and efficiency that can be found in creating systems. Why would our communication be any different? I just showed you Christopher Vogler's version of the full hero's journey. This is Dan Harmon's version, who we talked about at the beginning of this course. Harmon's version is an 8-step simplified variation that we'll use to inform your brand story script. Again, the beauty of this model is that it's plug and play. This works for messaging, strategy, web design, script writing, written content, and films alike. Dan Harmon is the creator of the TV show Community. If you've never seen that show, it's hilarious and you should definitely check it out. If you have any interest in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the show Community was a testing ground for character development and story structure for the Russo brothers, who were producers on the show, before they applied what they learned on the show to the big screen in the MCU. Early in Dan Harmon's career as a screenwriter, he wanted to find a structure that would work and make writing easier. He started researching story structures and came across Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. And throughout his career, he's distilled the hero's journey down to a more simplified 8-step version. So let's walk through that story structure. The hero's journey is broken down first into 2 halves called the ordinary world and the special world. You can see that shown in blue and brown in the center circle. The character in this story structure passes from the ordinary world into the special world, learns something new about themselves, and then returns to the ordinary world having changed. All variations of the hero's journey follow this basic structure. For Dan Harmon, he follows this 8-step model. You, need, go, search, find, take, return, change. Notice again the departure, initiation, and return, or Act 1, problem, Act 2, solution, and Act 3, result thread that is interwoven throughout Dan Harmon's version. You might be familiar with Donald Miller and the story brand framework. I mentioned Donald Miller at the beginning of this course as well. This is Donald Miller's take on the hero's journey structure. The character with a problem meets a guide who gives your donor a plan and calls them to action that results in either success if you donate or failure if you choose not to. Again, Notice the problem, solution, and result, or Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 thread interwoven throughout this model. This is going to be a reoccurring thread throughout all the structures that we'll show you. It's important to note that the Donald Miller version focuses on the donor as the only audience member. This is a variation and a nuance that we'll make as we work into our version of the hero's journey. To outline this story structure with a familiar story, we're going to use Luke Skywalker from Star Wars. Star Wars is famous for following the hero's journey story structure, but we could just as easily replace Luke Skywalker with Katniss and Haymitch from Hunger Games, or Frodo and Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings, but I like Star Wars, so we'll stick with that. So in Star Wars, we find Luke Skywalker, a farm boy who is our main character and will end up being the hero of the story. Luke Skywalker runs into a problem when the Empire kills his aunt and uncle. Through this process, he meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, who serves as his mentor and guide and calls him to adventure. Obi-Wan calls Luke to adventure and gives him a plan as he teaches Luke how to use the Force. In this story, the Force serves as the plan and solution to Luke's problem. Luke accepts the call and learns the ways of the Force from Obi-Wan. He helps save the princess. And notice that there is tension and unresolved conflict throughout this storyline. There's suspense in this structure throughout, and tension between the problem, the solution, and the result. Luke's adventure eventually brings him back to the Death Star, where he applies what he learned from Obi-Wan, and he helps the rebellion destroy the Death Star, crippling the Empire that killed his aunt and uncle. And with that, we've seen how Luke Skywalker's journey follows the hero's journey. Also notice how the Force sits at the center of the story. In Star Wars, in the Star Wars universe, it holds that universe together. And as we move into your brand stories, you'll see how this translates to your ministries. And again, you can also see that the problem, solution, or result, or Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 formula, or the thread, play out throughout Luke's journey. Now let's look at how we can apply this story structure to your brand story script or your partners and participants' journey. Hopefully, as we've shown you the models of Vogler, Harmon, and Miller, you're beginning to see where the influence comes from for the model we're about to show you. How the problem, solution, and result thread is interwoven throughout all of these models. All of these models find their roots in the hero's journey, but they all have their own application and nuance specific to their context. As we present our partner and participant journey version, you can see where we've derived influence, but you'll also see some key differences that we think are important. It's essentially the exact same structure, but notice that the characters in the story have changed. Instead of Luke Skywalker, we start the story with your characters, in this case, your partners and participants. They have a problem presented as your cause or the brokenness or injustice that you're trying to solve or repair. Luckily, they've met your brand who will serve them as a guide and help them solve the problem. You, as the mentor, call them to action and you give them a plan, which is your solution or strategy that you're using to solve the problem that you've posed. I want to bring attention to where we've placed the call to action or the call to adventure in this story. It's earlier in the audience journey than most marketing you've probably seen. If you remember back to Donald Miller's story brand framework, the slide that we showed earlier, he puts the plan before the call to action. In the ministry world, how often do we tend to treat the call to action as the final step? Donate, invest, give. We've made that mistake ourselves with our own clients. It's almost always the ultimate goal and the final action we want our audience to take. When the call to action is treated as the end of the story, I think we've missed out on so many opportunities for our partners and participants to play more important roles in the story. The call to action is the beginning of the journey. It's the beginning of the story for the heroes. We have to stop treating the call to action as the end game if we want to build strong brands and brand advocates. We should be inviting our partners and participants on a journey that starts with the call to action. Our hope should be that our partners don't just stop at the call to action and invest financially in our ministries, but that they move to become advocates for our causes. If you're a disciple-making ministry, you don't just want people to stop at financially investing in your ministry. You should want them to advocate for your ministry, to share your training with their networks, and to become disciple makers themselves. For your participants, your hope should not be that they become converts. It shouldn't even stop at them becoming disciples. Your hope is that they become a disciple who makes reproducing disciples. If you run a pregnancy center, your hope for your partners doesn't stop at financial investment. Your hope for your partners is that they become advocates for the unborn, that they share passionately with their friends and family, that they enter into the political arena and support your cause at that level. For your participants, your hope shouldn't be just to stop at the mother or the family choosing life. Your hope is that they are transformed by the love of Christ themselves, that they see the value and worth of life, not only for the baby, but for themselves, that they understand that their child and they themselves are all created in the image of God, and that they've been called to so much more than choosing life for the baby. They've been called to raise a family, to build a strong family unit, and they've been invited into a right relationship with Jesus. And he wants them to live in the freedom that is only found in him as much as he wants freedom for that child. Or what about the Christian life? How many of our churches or how many of us treat our conversion as the ultimate goal and the end of the story? Christ transforms us. Sometimes we're baptized and it stops there. The church has done its job, right? No, that's not the end of the story, right? That's where our story begins. Christ is inviting us into so much more than a ticket to heaven. He wants to sanctify us. He wants to make us more like him. He's inviting us into the redemptive story of humanity, to be disciple makers of the nations in partnership with him. He wants us to be in partnership with him in his redemptive work. He wants us to continually grow in an intimate relationship with him. He wants to continually uproot sin in our hearts, constantly transforming us into men and women who are more like him, who know his voice, who abide and walk and stride with him. He's invited us into so much more than salvation. His salvific work is incredible, but that's just the start of our stories. We have to stop treating our conversion as the end of the story. When we do, we become stagnant and lukewarm. You see, the journey doesn't stop with the call to action. The journey starts with the call to action. And the messaging structures of your ministries and the stories we tell need to support that reality. If you'll remember back to our Star Wars example, the Force sat at the center of the story. For our ministries, Jesus sits at the center of the story. He is the creator of all the characters in the story. He helps us recognize the problem. He has called each of us to our respective ministries. He calls us in our ministries to action. He calls our partners into generosity and partnership with him and the work he is doing in and through your ministries. He calls our participants out of the difficult situations that they find themselves in. He provides and gives guidance to your strategies and plans. He walks with us through the fight, calls us to obedience, and helps us walk in that obedience. In him alone, we find freedom. In him alone, our partners find freedom through their generosity and advocacy. In him alone, do your participants find freedom from what they've been called out of and freedom in what they've been called into. Jesus doesn't just sit at the center of the story. He's in every part of the story, and we need to recognize and be aware of that. In many of your other courses or our other courses, we talk about Jesus being the fulfillment of the monomyth. This is what C.S. Lewis argued, that Jesus was the fulfillment of the monomyth. The reason our partners and participants get to play the role of the hero in our stories is that Jesus was and is the real and true hero. And because we all get to share in his death and resurrection, Romans 6, our participants and our partners relate to his death and resurrection and get to fill the hero role as well. When we follow this structure and tell our stories in this way, when we tell the full story, we can engage audiences at a deeply emotional level. And as you start paying attention to the stories of the partners and participants of your ministries, you'll start finding people that are at different stages of this journey. People who haven't completed the full journey, but are just starting. You might run into a participant who has only just been called to an adventure and out of human trafficking. You might meet a partner who has accepted the call to action in their generosity, but now they are realizing the freedom they've found in their generosity, and they want to be a part of what your ministry is doing at an even deeper level. This will become more relevant in our content writing course, but pay attention to what stage people are at in their journey. It'll help you decide whether or not the story is ready to be told. So this is the structure that we're going to follow as we build your brand story scripts. As we work through this and move into the rest of the content we'll share in this course, you'll notice again the problem, solution, and result structure shows up once again in the partners and participant journey. In your holistic core messaging that we'll work through in this course, that formula is going to show up again as early as your mission statement. Again, notice that there are 3 acts to the story: the departure, initiation, and return, or problem, solution, and result. This same formula will be used to create one-liners throughout many of your brand touch points. Act 1, the characters or your partners and participants have a problem. They meet a guide, which is your ministry, who calls them to action. For partners, the call to action is differing levels of financial investment and eventually advocacy. For participants, the call to action is a call out of sin, slavery, oppression, or whatever cause or injustice your ministry exists to fight or solve. Remember, your core messaging communication needs to be general enough and holistic enough to address both your partner and your participant. Act 2, your partners and participants are given a plan which they accept. That can appear as fighting for your cause or against injustice, obedience or acceptance to a call, or submission to Christ and his authority in someone's life. Act 3, and finally, the acceptance of the call and the submission to the plan results in freedom and your original purpose being fulfilled. And with that, we've completed the full story arc, and hopefully you can begin to see how this framework can be applied to your ministry's core messaging. Now that we've spent some time walking through the structure, let's start putting things into place with your holistic core messaging. And we'll start with your purpose statement. If you've taken our purpose-driven strategy course, you should be entering into this phase of the process with your why already intact. Your purpose statement is simply your why clearly and succinctly communicated in a single sentence tagline or phrase. With this single sentence statement, you should be able to answer the questions, why do you exist and what do you believe? If your ministry story was a book, this would be the title of your book. This sentence is going to serve as the foundation of your ministry's core messaging. It should inform everything you say and do as a ministry. This is the core belief behind your brand. This is why it all matters. We'll show a couple of examples in a couple of slides. Your purpose statement is the big picture statement. It should answer the question, what would the world look like if your work was completed? If your work was complete, this single sentence statement would be the result. It's important to keep in mind that no matter how long your organization exists, your purpose statement should never change. Your solutions and strategies might change, but your purpose statement should be big enough and grand enough that it never changes. And it should be communicated outside of your solutions and your strategies. Your how you do what you do, your solutions and your strategies should not show up in this statement. Additionally, this statement is where we want to start our holistic communication. Remember back to our holistic core messaging slide. This statement needs to address both your participant and your partner without alienating one or the other. It should not only address or communicate with your partners. When they hear or read your purpose statement, both your partners and your participants should be able to say, I'd like to see that happen. If you're creating your own purpose statement or reworking your current communication models as you work through this course, these are the questions you want to ask. There's no real formula at this point, but if you set out to answer these questions as you create this statement, you'll be moving in the right direction. Remember, do not include your how or your what in this statement. If you can get creative with your writing and somehow make this a word picture, it's going to have an even greater effect. This is where the creative writing comes into play. If this statement can conjure up an image in my mind as the reader and communicate the belief behind your brand, all while explaining why you do what you do, and if you can do it in a single short sentence, you're going to have an incredibly powerful purpose statement that will drive, inform, and serve as the foundation of everything that you say and do as an organization. At the end of the day, your purpose statement is why it all matters. It's why your organization matters and why your ministry exists. What do you believe the world should look like? What does your ideal world look like? If you completed your work tomorrow, what would the world look like? Your purpose statement should answer these questions without communicating your how and your what, and it should do this in a way that addresses your entire audience, your partners, and your participants. All right, let's look at some great examples. Notice the simplicity behind these statements. They don't get into the nitty-gritty details of the solutions these organizations use to solve their problems. These are companies that have a clear purpose, and all of their communication centers around and is informed by these statements. These statements are clear and easy to remember. They are not long-winded vision statements that are difficult to remember. There is clarity in what is being said in these statements, and that clarity gives strong direction for the rest of the communication that is put out by all of these organizations. REI is one of my favorite examples from the commercial world. REI has a clear purpose that goes beyond what they do or how they do it. Their purpose statement is bigger than what they do, which is to sell clothing and outdoor gear. It's bigger than how they sell outdoor clothing and outdoor gear. REI identifies with the explorer archetype, and if you follow their communication, you'll notice that everything that they say, the stories that they tell, and the images that they use all fall in line with the explorer archetype. And you can see that within their purpose statement, the who, the archetypal character, is already starting to show itself with the words that were chosen for this purpose statement. And as a customer who views myself as an explorer, I can connect with this brand. They represent the explorer, and I want to tie myself to REI because I want to be viewed as an explorer. There's a powerful brand loyalty within that connection that helps make these companies successful. What if we could create that for your ministry brand? Now, a little side note. REI recently went out and made a pretty unwise move as it pertains to my loyalty to the company. REI has made a public statement that they will pay for employees to go across state lines for their abortions. No matter how well they message, no matter how well they are storytelling and engaging with me as a customer, that single statement has destroyed their relationship with me. There was no reason to make that statement. REI is an organization that's supposed to be dedicated to helping me get outside and explore. And instead, they chose to enter into a conversation they have no business partaking in. It's an off-brand and outside of their purpose to make a statement like that as an organization, and it has alienated their brand from me as a member of their audience. The reason I share this example is that I want to show you how important it is that your actions always coincide and align with your words. You can have the most brilliantly crafted and creative core messaging ever created, but if your actions don't match your words, you can fracture and destroy what you're trying to build. Your customer's brand experience must match what you're saying. All right, now that we have a purpose statement that serves as our core messaging foundation, we can now move on to developing the mission statement. Every ministry has a story to tell, and your mission statement is your ministry's full story in its most simple form. Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. We want to move away from long-winded, confusing paragraphs that use business speak and business terminology, ministry or church lingo, and we want to move towards clarity and simplicity. Your mission statement should be easy to understand, easy to remember, include a great ambition, and be actionable. And with that in mind, let's dive into the formula we'll use for crafting a great mission statement. A few slides ago, I showed you the partner and participant journey, and we broke that journey down into Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. We said that the departure, initiation, and return stages from the hero's journey can be classified as the problem, the solution, and the result. This problem, solution, and result structure is the formula that will make up your mission statement. First, we want to introduce the problem. What is your ministry's highest level external problem? State that problem in a single sentence or phrase. Next, you'll introduce the solution. What is your solution or strategy for solving the external problem you just posed? Lastly, define the results. What does success look like if your strategy succeeds? This is where your story shows up and can even be similar to or a variation of your why or your purpose statement. Parts or all of your purpose statement can show up in this result phase in your mission statement, and that's okay. As you write content for your problem, solution, and result, write them in their most simple terms and at the highest levels possible. You don't need to go into crazy detail at this point. There will be an opportunity for greater detail later in your content production. The mission statement must be clear. Write each section of the formula in different ways from different angles, but stick to the structure. By the end, when you put your problem, solution, and result together, you should have a statement that is 2 to 3 sentences long and clearly defines what, how, and why you do what you do. How many of your ministries can say you have a statement that is that short and clear? Now, read it to others. Read it to strangers and acquaintances who don't know you and your ministry. If someone doesn't understand your why, how, and what from your mission statement, it's not clear enough. Or you're missing something and should revisit the formula and the words that you've chosen. When you're crafting your mission statement, please avoid vague, obscure, and ambiguous language. We talked about avoiding business lingo or church lingo earlier. You might understand it. Your staff might understand it, but your audience likely won't. And your audience is your main concern and priority in all of your communication. Your audience shouldn't just be taken into consideration. They should be your main focus and priority. And just like that, your purpose statement, remember that your mission statement needs to be holistic. It needs to speak to multiple audiences, your partners and your participants. This will be a common thread and note throughout all of your communication. Remember, just like your purpose statement, when they hear or read your purpose statement, both your partners and your participants should be able to say, "I'd like to see that happen." A properly written mission statement can be a powerful tool to help develop clarity in your communication. I've been asked many times by clients why we include the problem in the mission statement. People have asked, shouldn't the mission statement just be a hopeful statement? Remember back to our purpose-driven strategy course or any of our storytelling courses. The story is defined as conflict changes life. If a story doesn't have conflict, it's not a story. There's no weight to your mission statement if it doesn't include the conflict. If there's no cost, the hope doesn't matter and your audience won't care. The problem is incredibly important and can't be ignored or forgotten. Now, let's remember back to your purpose-driven strategy course for a minute where we discussed what, how, and why. This mission statement formula follows and includes all of your what, how, and why elements. Notice your conflict or your need is what you do. Your strategy or solution is how you do what you do. And your result or success is why you do what you do. The same thing goes for your one-liner and your story script, both of which we'll discuss later on. Notice how all of these pieces we've been discussing come together to communicate clearly and communicate with why or belief or purpose-centered communication. When you start communicating with this level of clarity and structure, we believe things can get really exciting. Now, in order to execute on the purpose statement and mission statement, there are going to be some vital traits your people are going to need in order to see the mission through to completion. In traditional corporate manifestos, these would be your core values. The problem with most core values, though, is that 1, ministries often have too many values listed for your team to remember. 2, they are usually nouns, which are not actionable. And 3, values tend to be words that correspond to or communicate what you believe in as an organization. But remember, We've already created a purpose statement that holds our why. It is a statement that communicates what you believe. And so there is no need for a set of values that communicate that same thing. They only serve to be one more thing for your team to remember. And it serves as repetition in your communication. What if your core values were a list of vital traits or characteristics that guided the type of people you hired? What if they were a list of traits that communicated how and your people needed to conduct yourselves in order to achieve the mission? We believe a set of vital traits is a much more effective tool in providing guidance for hiring and staff behavior. Now, as you work through developing your vital traits, again, the traits your team needs to have or act on in order to achieve your mission, I'm going to encourage you to stick to 3 vital traits. Your teams won't remember more than that. And if you keep your vital traits to 3, your team is going to be able to remember them better, and they'll be able to take action on them more effectively than if your list includes 5, 6, or 10 vital traits or core values. As you work through your vital traits, here are the boxes that you need to check off before a vital trait gets added to your list. They need to be necessary traits. By that, I mean the traits you choose need to be necessary to achieve the mission. If a trait isn't relevant to your work, it probably shouldn't get added to the list. They need to be actionable, aspirational, and achievable. Are your traits nouns or are they verbs and adjectives? Nouns are usually not actionable, while verbs are actionable. Your vital traits need to be aspirational. Are your traits characteristics that your teams can strive towards? Even if your team has the traits you've listed, can they continue to strive towards these traits? Your traits need to be achievable. Are your traits achievable or are they unattainable because they are either too obscure or too out of reach? Perfection should not be on your vital traits list. It shouldn't even make the short list. And then lastly, you're going to want to put these in rank order. List your vital traits in order of importance and then communicate to your team that they are listed in rank order. That way, if someone from your team runs into a situation where they need to make a decision on choosing one trait over another, they know the rank order and therefore know the direction that they should choose. Remember, we want to provide clarity for our own people as much as for our audience. And sharing your rank order for your vital traits will help your team in those situations where they need to make a choice between one over the other. So for example, if empathetic and financially frugal are both items on your vital traits list, you probably want to put empathetic first. That way your team knows that even though they should be financially frugal, it's never going to be at the expense of people. So to summarize, as you work through your vital traits list, make sure that they check these boxes. Are they necessary traits? Are they actionable, aspirational, and achievable traits? And are your traits listed in rank order for your team? Keep these requirements in mind as you work through your vital traits. And remember, stick to 3 max. You don't want your team to have to remember too many things. Now, I want to share an additional and optional piece that can be added to your messaging throughout different touch points for your brand. In essence, this is your mission statement. And if you want to simplify things and use your mission statement as your one-liner, you're welcome to do so. They are the exact same formula. Here's where the one-liner differs from your mission statement, though. Say I run a ministry that employs more than one strategy to get our work done. I could have a one-liner for each of my different strategies or departments. So for example, World Vision is known for its child sponsorship programs, but they also do water wells, fight human trafficking, and they work to end FGM or female genital mutilation. So World Vision's mission statement might communicate a grand mission for the ministry as a whole, serving as an umbrella statement over the entire ministry. And then they might have a one-liner that focuses on each area of expertise. A one-liner for child sponsorship, a one-liner for human trafficking, a one-liner for water wells, and one for FGM. Now, the cool thing about a one-liner is that it can be used in a wide variety of brand touchpoints. For example, you could use your one-liner on your email signature, in email campaigns, or as an elevator pitch. My favorite place to use a one-liner is on the header of a website as an attention-grabbing statement that sums up the ministry in 2 to 3 sentences. The one-liner is a powerful little tool for creating simplicity in your messaging. So let's look at the one-liner formula in a bit more detail. Now, this should look similar. That's because they are the exact same formula: the problem, the solution, and the result. We introduce the problem. Next, you'll introduce the solution. What is your solution or strategy for solving the external problem you just posed? And lastly, define the results. What does success look like if your strategy succeeds? Again, this is where your why shows up. Now let's think back to that World Vision example I gave in the last slide. World Vision might have an overarching mission statement for the entire ministry, but they could have a separate one-liner for each segment of their ministry working to solve FGM, drill water wells, provide for children, etc. The one-liner can create for FGM, or the one-liner they create for FGM would establish an FGM-specific problem. The solution they give would be a strategy strictly used for solving FGM, and the result would also be FGM specific. The one-liner also allows us to be nimble in our communication, clear about our communication, and follow a structure we know engages and relates, a structure that gives us a plug-and-play capability in our communication. It's a powerful tool. And with that, if you'll remember back to our purpose-driven strategy course, you'll see that you've now completed your holistic core messaging. The guiding principles you created in our last course sit at the center and inform your core messaging. The guiding principles lay the groundwork in establishing your core messaging. The guiding principles sit at the center of your core messaging and inform your purpose statement, your mission statement, and your vital traits. And now that we've completed your holistic core messaging, you can see how all of these things work together. Again, it's important to note your holistic core messaging, the elements that we work through in this course are what will be seen publicly. Your guiding principles should be for internal purposes only. They simply lay the groundwork for your public-facing communication. Your audience does not need to know that your ministry's archetypal character is the caregiver. These guiding principle elements simply provide your teams with guidance as you craft your core messaging that we worked through today. In our strategy course, I shared this strategy and messaging map PDF, and I'll share the same thing here. This PDF resource we created for you will help you map out all of the pieces we discuss in our purpose-driven strategy course and this core messaging course. This map provides a nice little visual highlighting all of the pieces needed to develop a complete story for your ministry's holistic core messaging. Click on this slide, or you can find this document on the free resources page on our website. By the time you finish working through these courses in this map, you should be able to fit your entire brand's core messaging, communication structure, and strategy on a single page. Now, these are some great resources for the content I've shared today. Everything I've shared with you today is inspired in some way by these resources. You have access to this deck on our website. Just go to our resources page and you'll find the deck and the affiliated resources again. And please feel free to continue researching the things we've discussed today and start implementing what we've discussed. Story is so much more powerful at engaging and inspiring people to action than data and statistics first. Story will make a world of difference in your marketing. And if at any point you have additional questions or need help telling your stories or designing communication strategies and content that have purpose and engaging structure, we are happy to help. This is what we do at Reliant, and we're always looking for new ministry partners to partner with and support. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to learn about storytelling and story structures with us at Reliant. Please don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions. This is our ministry. This is the way we are using our skills, talents, and abilities for the kingdom. So please grant us the opportunity to pour into you so that we can tell the stories of how God is working with greater efficiency and effectiveness throughout all of our content production and storytelling. Thanks so much.